Timothy Burns, known as Tim to his friends, glanced at his mobile phone after receiving a message from Candace, or Candy as she preferred to be called, his wife of 5 years. He had just signed a service contract with a major company in California, with offices spread across the country. He knew his boss, Jake Hudson, would be pleased with the new contract as it meant a significant expansion for their IT company. The new contract also meant a substantial salary increase. Perhaps now, he thought, he and Candy could finally start their own family as they had planned. However, he felt anxious. Worries had started to seed in his mind after a camping trip with Jake more than a week ago. Something seemed different with her when they returned from the trip, like her mood had shifted, and she started becoming irritable with him. But that wasn't all. He noticed something else when they got home and tossed clothes into the laundry basket. A pair of her underwear had something at the bottom, which he picked up and realized had stiffened and had a distinct smell. It made him realize the truth and feel like his world was crumbling. He vowed to uncover the truth and knew he would soon head to the Northwest. He visited a lawyer to explore his options if Candy was deceiving him because he believed it might spell the end of their marriage. "Are you sure your wife is having an affair?" Ruby Hawkins asked. Ruby, a family and divorce lawyer, was introduced by a newly divorced friend who was cheated on. "Not entirely sure," he said, "but I need to know, and if that's the case, I want a divorce." "In that case," Ruby said, "most divorces in this state happen without anyone's fault. You could file based on infidelity, but you'll need convincing evidence. I mean, like photos or videos." Tim asked. "Exactly," Ruby said. "If you want, you can instruct an investigator to monitor her and make sure you're sure." "Yes, do it," Tim said. "During the divorce process, what can I expect?" "Well, since she earns an income comparable to yours as a teacher, there's a chance we can help you avoid child support. You don't own any property and have no children, so it's basically a 50-50 split. You keep your retirement fund, and she keeps hers. Essentially, it's a fair distribution of assets. If she deceived you, we'll use that as a basis and use any evidence we have to ensure a favorable outcome. I'll start working on the paperwork, and we'll send it when we have evidence agreed." Tim said. "Yes, please do so," he replied. "I'll be leaving town for about 3 days, so I think that's when she might do it." She called investigator Marvin Johnson, and he suggested Tim install a tracking app on her phone. He also gave Tim a device to record calls on the landline and a hidden recorder placed in her purse. Tim hated having to do this, but he needed to know the truth. There were other signs too. Since the camping trip, Jake seemed to become more arrogant and condescending towards him. It was as if he knew something Tim didn't. He managed to keep it together for a week, and Candy drove him to the airport, kissing him goodbye. "I'll call you tonight after dinner," he said. "All right, honey," she said. "Have a safe trip." The first night he was away, he called Candy as promised and was somewhat shocked when she said she would be working as a server at a party Jake was hosting at their house that evening. According to Candy, one of the servers fell ill, and Jake asked if she would be willing to fill in. He didn't know if Jake had any plans, as he didn't mention anything. He promised to pay her $150 for the evening. Candy said, "I could use some extra money because I won't be back to work for a few weeks after that." He knew classes would start early, and she genuinely needed some extra cash. But something felt off about this. "Really?" Tim asked. "All right, go ahead, but be careful, and tell me about it tomorrow, okay?" "Okay," she said. "You know I love you, right?" "Yes," he said. "And I love you. Good night." He ended the call, but in his head, he started to feel anxious. He called the investigator. "I just want to report that Candy has been invited to serve at a party at Jake Hudson's house," Tim said. "All right," Marvin said. "We've succeeded. I'll send you all the information we find." "Thank you," Tim said, ending the conversation. The next day, he called Candy on her mobile, but there was no answer. He also called the home phone, but only got the answering machine. Of course, she wasn't home with Jake, he thought. However, his hopes were dashed when he received an email from Marvin that same day. Candy stayed overnight at the Hudsons, and she's still there, the email said, and she was very busy the night before. I've attached some photos, but I want to warn you that they are quite shocking. I'll give you a comprehensive report when you return, Tim said. He opened the attached files, and his heart sank. His beloved wife, with whom he had shared the past 5 years, had engaged in sexual activities with 3 individuals, all of whom he had previously considered friends. His hands began to tremble, and tears welled up in his eyes. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. He tried calling her again, but her phone went straight to voicemail. He also tried calling his home phone, but only received the answering machine. He left no messages and went to the hotel bar to drown his sorrows. The next morning, he checked the tracking device and saw that Candy's phone was still at Jake's house, meaning she was likely still there. Marvin confirmed this through an email with 2 more photos of his wife. The nature of the photos was similar to the ones before, but there were 10 people in total, including Jake, Mike's son, and 5 other employees from Jake's IT company. He had previously regarded all these people as trustworthy colleagues, but that was no longer the case. He didn't recognize the other 3 individuals and assumed they were Mike's friends. He completed his work with the client in California, took the contract with him, checked out of the hotel, and caught an early flight home. He hailed a taxi at the airport and realized Candy's car was missing. When he arrived home, he checked the tracking device, finding her phone still at Jake's. He went inside, changed, and called Ruby's office. He was surprised when the receptionist said she was available and could meet him in the afternoon. He called Candy, and to his surprise, she answered. She sounded cheerful, saying, "Hello, this is Tim. Where are you?" he asked. "I'm at home, just finishing up some last-minute tasks before class," she said, and he was shocked that she lied so blatantly. "I understand," he said. "So I'm done in California and heading home soon." "Oh, okay," she said. "I miss you so much. Call me when you land, and I'll pick you up at the airport." "No need, don't worry," he said. "I'll take a taxi. Goodbye." He ended the call and wondered if she noticed that he didn't say he loved her or that they would meet later. Shaking his head, he left the house and went to visit Ruby. Candy looked at her phone after Tim's call ended. He always ended his calls by saying he loved her, but this time he didn't. In fact, she noticed his voice was not friendly at all. She fully intended to go home after that first night, but lying naked between Jake and Mike's son felt too amazing. She couldn't leave. After all, she owed that to herself. She thought that it would all end when classes resumed. She believed so, and Tim would never know. Therefore, she spent the next day and night with Jake and Mike, Mike's son. On the second day, Jake went to work for a few hours, but Mike kept her busy and even arranged for some of his friends to join them. When Jake returned home, she was engaging in a sexual encounter with Mike on Jake's bed. After they finished, Jake sat up and looked at her. "Maybe I should send your husband somewhere more often," he said with a sly smile. "I know my classes are starting again, so I won't be around for a week," she replied. "I wouldn't dare do something like this while he's still at home." "Why not?" Jake asked. "Maybe for a change, he'd like to see how real men treat me." Both Jake and Mike laughed at this. "But I have to admit, I had a great time," she said, "but I still love him, and I don't want to hurt him." "Well, maybe I can arrange for him to be away next weekend," Jake suggested. "That way, you can come and play with us at home." "Sounds amusing," she said, "but at some point, he'll figure it out." "Don't worry," Jake said, lifting his video camera. "I'll take care of Timmy. The kid has only one condition." "What's that?" she asked. "I don't want you having sex with him anymore," Jake said. "Now you belong to us, understand?" "All right, but how will I do this?" she asked. "You'll come up with something," Jake said. "Give some excuse, like you have a headache, for example." "All right, I'll give it a try," she said. At the end of that day, some of Mike's friends arrived, and Candy had the chance to try her product. Jake invited some single guys from that group, and she now officially became the belle of the ball and enjoyed it. Tim was simply shocked when he saw all the evidence that Marvin had collected. Besides the photos, he had 2 DVD videos of his wife, performing various roles with different men, something she would never do with him. His love for her vanished after witnessing her debauchery. Ruby tried to help him as best as she could, but it was a failure. He wondered how she could, suddenly like this, after years, become such a traitor. What about Jake? He thought about this older man, whom he initially saw as a friend but now knew better. I will proceed and file for divorce, based on the grounds of infidelity. Ruby said, if you want, I can also file a lawsuit regarding emotional theft against Jake and those working with him. These types of suits usually don't go far, but I think we can reach a good settlement. Do what you need to do, Tim said. Just don't do anything foolish. Don't worry. Ruby said, I don't want to have to post bail for you from inside a prison. Tim nodded and said, don't worry, I won't. When can you prepare the documents? I can have everything ready to send within a few days. She said, in the meantime, try to act normal around your wife. I'm not a great actor, Tim told her, and I'll never touch her again. God only knows what she's gotten from these men. Tell her you're not feeling well. Ruby suggested, this will buy you some more time. Tim agreed with a nod. All right, he said before leaving. As he sat in his car, suddenly he realized another thing. There's no way he could work for Jake anymore, and he would never tolerate the presence of those men nearby. They would make him feel betrayed. He took out his phone and scrolled through the contacts until he found the number he wanted. He dialed the number, hoping for the best. Carlson. The voice on the other end said when Tim answered, John here. John, this is Tim Burns, Tim said. Tim, how are you doing? John, an old friend, asked. Could be better, Tim replied. Listen, is there still a position at Empire Company? John Carlson, the CEO of Empire, had been trying to recruit Tim for a while. But Tim felt a sense of loyalty to Jake. However, now there was no trace of that loyalty left. Of course, John said, have you finally decided to join a reputable company? Yes, something like that. Tim said, some things have caught my attention, and I feel I can't continue working there. I apologize for having to say this. Sorry to hear that, John said. Is there anything I can help with? Just give me a job. Tim said, I promise to work as diligently as I did with Jake. Certainly, John said. Can you start on Monday? Absolutely, Tim said. Sure. John said, look here, why don't you and your beautiful wife stop by tonight to try Rose's famous lasagna? We can chat, and I can discuss compensation packages with you. I'd love to, but unfortunately, I can't bring my wife along, Tim said, seemingly asking John for help. Can you talk about what happened? Tim asked John. I really don't want to discuss details over the phone. I can delve deeper into this issue tonight if you want, John said with concern. You know, Rose is a certified counselor. Maybe she can help you out. Sounds good, Tim said. I appreciate that. All right, John. I'll call Rose and let her know. Do you think you can stop by at 6:30 p.m. today? Of course, Tim said. 6:30 today. Thank you so much, my friend. My pleasure, John said. They ended the conversation, and Tim felt like a heavy burden had been lifted. He started the car and drove home. When he arrived there, he realized Candy hadn't returned from Jake's house yet. He grabbed his suitcase and entered the house. He took a shower, changed clothes, and then sat down at the computer to write a resignation letter. Candy finally returned around 5 p.m. and found her husband sitting in front of the computer. She approached him for a kiss, but he turned away, and eventually she kissed his cheek. Surprised, she looked at him before speaking. Is everything okay? She asked. Not really, he said. I don't feel well. Maybe it's due to the time zone change. Or something. I don't know. Tonight, I'll sleep on the sofa when I get back. Will you be back? She asked. Where are you going? I'm meeting someone for dinner, he said. Are you dating someone? She asked with a worried tone. Do you mean am I having an affair? He asked her. No, I have never betrayed you throughout the time we lived together, and I don't intend to do that now. Can you believe that? She held back a sense of horror. Does he know? She wondered. No, he certainly won't be able to find out. All he needs to do is say yes, she answered herself. I can, she said. Tim didn't believe. So how was your trip to California? She asked, trying to change the topic. Successful, he said. What about your little job at Jake's house? Everything is fine, she said. Even when it's difficult, it's still enjoyable. I bet, he said emotionlessly. He looked at the clock and continued. I guess I'll go, he told her before saving his work and turning off the computer. He stood up, walked past her without saying a word, and went into the main bedroom, where he changed into less formal attire. When he stepped out, Candy was sitting on the sofa. How long will you be gone? She asked. I don't know, he said. Don't wait for me, goodbye. He grabbed his keys and walked out the door. She couldn't help but notice that he didn't kiss her and didn't say he loved her, something he usually did when leaving the house. Seeing his car leave, she picked up the landline phone and called Jake, unaware that her conversation was being recorded. Jake, I think he knows something, she said. What does he think? Jake asked. He didn't touch me at all, she said. Usually he always kisses me and says he loves me, but this time he didn't. He looked cold and left, saying he had a dinner appointment. How was his trip to California? She asked, trying to change the subject. He said it was successful. Jake said, what about your little job at his house? Everything is fine, she said. Even when it's difficult, it's still enjoyable. I bet, he said emotionlessly. She looked at the clock and continued. He said he'll go. What do you think? Jake asked. He didn't say who he's going to have dinner with. She said, no, he wouldn't do that, she said. But if he knows something, if he's planning to leave me, what then? What would he do? Stop worrying so much, Jake said. Anyway, you can still come stay with us if he leaves. And don't worry about Timmy boy. I'm going to make him run so much that he'll hardly ever be at home. But I don't want to lose him, Candy sighed. I love him, Jake, in a loud voice. Yes, you've shown us your level of love for him in the past 2 days, haven't you? Jake said. Not happy at all. Jake, she said, I know what I'd done with the guy, and yes, I enjoyed it, but I still love him. I don't want to lose him. Yes, right, Jake said. Let him get rid of that thought. After a while, he'll understand, and if he doesn't, we can do something about it. You won't hurt him, right? She asked. Not many words, Jake said. We just need to show him how things will be from now on, and you'll help us make that happen. You'll help us explain everything to him when the time comes, Jake said. Remember, you belong to us now. I'm sure you wouldn't want the school board to see the video we have of you. You wouldn't dare, Candy said. Oh, but I really want to, Jake said. I have a video of you walking the long road, and many videos of you in very awkward situations. That means your behind belongs to me. So, you have to keep Timmy well behaved. Feeling overwhelmed, Candy gave up. All right, Jake, she said, but don't hurt him. Jake chuckled lightly over the phone. Yes, yes, as you say, he said, ending the conversation. Tim drove to the 2-story house where John and Rose Carlson lived. He got out of the car, holding the bottle of wine he had bought on the way. John opened the door as he rang the bell and greeted the bottle of wine politely. Come in, Tim, he said with a smile and gratitude. We'll put it to good use tonight. John led Tim into the dining room, where Rose was waiting for him with her lasagna dish. Tim, meet my wife Rose, John said. This is Tim Burns, our new customer service representative. Tim shook hands with Rose while John opened a bottle of wine. "Nice to meet you, Tim," Rose said with a smile. "I'm also pleased to meet you, Mrs. Carlson." Tim said, "Please call me Rose." She said, "Mrs. Carlson sounds too formal." They sat down at the dining table, and Rose served lasagna on plates, while John poured wine. Tim had never tasted lasagna so delicious and expressed his gratitude. "This is the best lasagna I've ever had," he said. "I really appreciate it." "I'm glad you like it, Tim," Rose said with a smile. "This is one of my specialties." "So, Tim, I don't want to pry into someone's privacy, but I'm curious about why you decided to break up with Jake so quickly," John said. "Has something happened, Tim?" Rose asked. Tim took a moment to gather his thoughts before recounting the story. "That was horrible," John said. "I sympathize with you, truly. There's also a similar event that happened to me, but in a completely different situation." "So what will you do now besides changing jobs?" Tim said. "I've met with a lawyer, and I'm filing for divorce," Tim said. "My lawyer says it will be a fairly equitable asset division." "As for counseling sessions," Rose asked, "have you considered that?" "Everything has gone too far," Tim said. "I don't know what affected Candy. It seems like she just flipped a switch and suddenly became a promiscuous woman. I never thought she would be strong enough to do this." "How are you coping with all of this?" Rose asked. "Not well," Tim said. "My lawyer suggests I try to behave normally around Candy, but for me, that's very difficult right now. I can't look her in the face. Maybe you should visit a psychologist," she suggested. "I could do that," Tim said. "Trust me, Rose is the best in the field," John said. "I think she could help you get through this if you want. Besides, this is also included in your social package. It's a plus point." Tim laughed. "I'm serious," he said. John added, "Rose is a blessing when I need her. I know she can help you too." He pointed to Rose. "What do you think? Can you fit it into your schedule?" "Of course," she said. "I think 1 hour per week will be enough. What do you think about this, Tim?" Tim thought about the proposal before answering. "All right, I'll give it a try," he said. John smiled and patted Tim on the shoulder. "Good man," he said. "I'll make sure you have the necessary time for counseling with Rose, and let me know the progress you make." "I will, thank you," Tim said. "Now, if you don't mind, honey and I will retreat to my office to discuss his new job," John said. She replied, "I'm fine with that," with a smile. "And I'm looking forward to working with you more, Tim." "Thank you," Tim said, standing beside John. They retreated to John's office, where he poured them each a glass of wine. They spent the next 2 hours discussing Tim's new job. When they finished, Tim felt like he was reclaiming his life. Tim shook hands with John and headed home. It was around 10 p.m. when Tim arrived home. He looked around and saw the lights still on in the house. He hoped Candy was home alone. He got out of the car, walked into the house, and found Candy sitting on the sofa. "So, how was your little meeting?" she asked. "Very good, thank you," he said. "Now, if you don't mind, I'll go to bed. Have a good evening." He walked into the second bedroom where his computer was placed. Candy asked, "Are you going to sleep here tonight?" "Yes," Tim said. "I still don't feel well, so I'll sleep on the futon." "All right, I guess it's not a problem," she said. "It's just that you've been away for 3 days, and I was hoping we could, spend some time together." "I'm not in the mood today," Tim said, truly repulsed at the thought of touching her at this point. "Fine," she said in a low voice. "Maybe tomorrow." "I don't know," he said. "We'll see." She nodded and turned away. She couldn't help but wonder if he knew anything about her recent actions. The next day, he woke up before Candy, grabbed the resignation letter, and poured himself a cup of coffee. He noticed Candy's Porsche on the kitchen table and grabbed the recorder, then played back the recording of yesterday's phone call. He left the apartment without saying goodbye or telling Candy that he loved her. She heard the door close as he left and went into bed, tears streaming down her face. When he arrived at the office, he hardly spoke to anyone. He greeted his secretary, then entered his office and closed the door. He was packing up when Jake walked into his office. "What's this?" Jake asked. Tim tossed a briefcase and pulled out 2 envelopes, one containing the contract he brought from California, he said, and the second was my resignation effective immediately. "I believe you owe me a bonus for getting the California invoice, and you owe me my final paycheck along with the rest of my vacation." "Hold on, Tim, we can talk about this," Jake said in shock. "Why are you leaving?" "I really need you," Tim asked. "You really don't know why, do you? Do you think I'm stupid or something? You know it's not right. Honestly, some things caught my attention, and I decided I couldn't work here anymore, so I got a job at another company. I'll be leaving in just a few minutes. Then I'll go to HR." "Wait, Tim, can we discuss this?" Jake asked. Tim shook his head. "There's nothing to talk about, Jake," Tim said. "I've ended it. I considered you a friend, but you stabbed me in the back and destroyed my marriage. You can find someone else to be your sugar daddy if you want. Is that clear?" Jake said, "Come on, you know your wife is totally willing to have sex with me. We shouldn't let something like this ruin your career. Let everything take its natural course for a while. Let Candy loosen up for a while. When she's done, she'll be yours. Do you really think I would agree to this? By the way, how long has it been since you had pleasure with her?" "Oh, the first time was at the camp. Jake spoke on Monday when he and others were skiing, and you should know that she bothered me all day. She even told me that he's better than you, and begged me to have sex right there." Tim never refused Candy. He tried a few times but couldn't do it. He couldn't explain why, and Candy never said anything about it. Around that time, he suddenly forced me to leave to take care of some things at the office. "Right?" Tim asked. "Do you want me to leave so you can have sex with my wife?" Jake smiled and nodded. "So what?" he asked. "Tim isn't done. And this whole thing about hiring her as a server at your party is just another excuse to get her into bed, isn't it?" Tim asked. "That's right. But so what?" Jake asked. Tim took out his phone and stopped the recording he started when Jake walked into the office. "Thanks for your acknowledgement," Tim said. "Now, if you don't mind, I'm done packing. I'll go to HR, and I won't bother you anymore." "Wait, Tim, you can't use this recording," Jake said. "We'll see," Tim said. "I'm leaving. Goodbye, Jake. You'll get what you deserve." "Oh, you forgot this," Jake said, lifting a photo of Candy that Tim left on his desk. "I didn't forget," Tim said. "I don't need it. If you and your son want her that way, you can keep her for yourself. I'm done with her and with you. Goodbye." With those words, he left the office. Jake watched him as he walked away, wondering what just happened. How did Tim know what he and his son did with Candy, he wondered. "It means he resigned," Candy said when Jake called. "When he called, he just handed me the contract and signed resignation letter and left." "What does he know?" she asked. When Jakey called, "He just told me about it," Jake said. "I don't know if he knows, but he knows." "What did you tell him?" she asked. "The truth," Jake said. "I told him how it happened the first time on the camping trip. You're really foolish," he asked, and I told him, Jake said. "He also left a picture of you that he kept on his desk. He said he didn't need it. If you and your son want her that way, keep her for yourself. I'm done with her and with him. Goodbye." She looked at the phone with tears streaming down her face. She didn't want a divorce, but she knew Tim wouldn't tolerate betrayal. She decided to do everything in her power to keep him. She sat on the sofa, holding her head in her hands, shedding tears over what she had done. A few minutes later, Tim turned into the driveway. He noticed Candy's car and looked around to check if Jake's car was nearby, not paying much attention to it. He grabbed the box and briefcase and walked inside. He saw Candy sitting on the sofa, and without saying anything, he entered his office. He closed and locked the door, then checked the recording. He found the recording and listened to the conversation between Candy and Jake. He forwarded it to his lawyer and then made a quick phone call. "Hello, Tim," she said. "I just received your final email. I'm preparing your documents." "Okay," Tim said. "When can they be submitted?" "If you want, I can help, and my secretary will deliver them after hours today," she said. "Is that suitable for you?" "That works, thanks," he said. After hanging up, he went to his gun safe, opened it, and took out an old .45 caliber handgun. He had no plans to use it, but he didn't want any trouble with Jake or Candy. He walked into the kitchen, placed the briefcase on the table, and looked at Candy. "We need to talk," he said, placing the gun on the table so he could grab it quickly if needed. "Is it really necessary?" she asked, pointing to the gun. "I hope not," he said. "I just want to make sure that if your lover decides to break in here—" "My lover?" she asked. "Don't pretend," he said. "I don't want to play your silly games. Now sit down. We need to discuss something." She sat down, frightened, not knowing what her husband would do. "The first important thing," Tim said, "is that someone will come this afternoon and serve you the papers." Candy gasped in surprise. "Divorce?" she asked. "Why?" "I don't want a divorce. I love you," Tim said. "Lies," he said. "I know everything about you, Jake, his son, and everyone else you've had fun with in recent days. So I filed for divorce on grounds of adultery." "Adultery?" she asked. "You have no evidence of that." Tim smiled, took out an envelope. "I've posted many stamped and sealed photos, all clearly showing you having sex with many people, including Jake. I also have videos and audio recordings," Tim said. "Do you want to see?" She shook her head, realizing it was a hopeless situation. "Okay," he said. "Considering the circumstances, I've been fair to you. No alimony support. You get half the money in the account, and we each keep our retirement benefits. You can take all your belongings. I've paid and canceled your credit cards. I have a cashier's check for the remaining half. There's also a restraining order stating that you must keep a distance of at least 150 meters from me, my residence, and my workplace. So from now until you receive the documents, you have time to arrange your belongings." "Are you kicking me out of the house?" she asked, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Pretty much," he said. "But what if I decide to contest the divorce?" she asked. Tim chuckled. "I don't think that would be wise," he said. "What do you think the school board would say if these photos and videos surfaced at the right time? Do you think the parents of your students would want someone like you teaching their children?" "I know you wouldn't dare," she screamed. "Do you want to test that theory?" Tim asked Candy. She looked down for a moment before shaking her head. "No," she said. "I need this job." "That's right. That's how it will play out," Tim said. "There are a few more things you should know." "What is it?" she asked with a tone of rejection. "You'll have to return the ring and give up my last name," he said. "Oh my God, you've become a heartless bastard, haven't you?" she said, then took off the ring. "Yes, but you've given me a good reason," Tim said. "I just want to know one thing. What happened to turn you from a loving and loyal wife into a mobile dump?" She lowered her eyes before saying, "It happened on the second day of the camping trip," she said. "He was on the boat, and I was in the tent. Jake walked by and saw me. I was undressed and lying there, trying to rest when Jake walked by and entered the tent. At first, he seemed awkward seeing me naked. We started talking, then he undressed, and that was the end of everything. So, a jerk takes off his pants, and you immediately jump into bed with him," Tim said. "And that's all it takes for you to become a traitor. How many times did you have sex with him on that trip?" "Twice," she said. "The first time was when he was on the water slide, and the second time was when Jake sent me back to the office." Tim shook his head and pointed to the pictures. "I see that none of your lovers use protection," he said. "Aren't you afraid of getting pregnant or infected by them?" "I'm still using birth control pills," she said. That doesn't mean you can't get pregnant, Tim said, and you can still get infected. Is this your plan? She asked. Oh God, no, she said. Tim shook his head. You know, throughout the time we were together, I was often harassed by women compared to you, looking like goddesses. I turned them all down. You know why? Because I thought I had a loving and loyal wife at home, and I would never do anything to hurt her. But you don't think about what you're doing. You don't care about my feelings. I hope it's all worth it to you. Now, pack up your belongings. I hope you'll leave when you receive the documents. Tim, please, she started. Can't we go to a therapist? I'll never do this again, I promise. Maybe you can forgive me for this one time, can't you? I will never forgive you for what you've done, Tim said, and his expression became even more rigid than she had ever seen. Never. Perhaps if you had slipped just once, got raped or drugged, that might have made me overlook it. But that didn't happen. Since the moment Jake took off his pants, you willingly became his plaything, and I will never be able to forgive that level of betrayal. But do you love me enough to get through this? She asked. He shook his head in refusal. I can't stand to see you right now, he said. The sooner you disappear from my life, the better. Now, go and start packing. Everything you leave behind will be burned, discarded, or donated to charity. She sobbed and stood up, heading into the main bedroom to pack her things. Tim watched as Candy pulled out full garbage bags one by one. She paused and looked at him. Could you at least help me take it to the car? She asked. No, Tim said. That's your garbage. You deal with it. And remember, everything you leave behind will be burned or thrown away, including the photos and your wedding dress. Would you really burn my wedding dress? She asked. My parents paid thousands for this dress. If you don't want it to be burned, you should take it with you, Tim said, holding back tears. She loaded the garbage bags into the car and came back for another bag. Damn. Tim wondered, does she have so much trash? A few hours later, she sat down exhausted. I can't fit anything else in the car, she said. Can I come back later to pick up the rest, please? No, Tim said. You're not allowed within 150 meters of this place. Ask your parents if they can come to get them. If you want, I won't discard anything for a few days. Thank you, Tim. I appreciate that, she said. Oh God, I just wonder what I'm going to tell my parents. Try telling the truth for once, Tim said. Tell them that you had an affair with my boss and others, and I'm kicking you out. Seriously. Will they disown me if I do that? She asked. Not my concern, Tim said, but I guarantee it will be worse if you try to make me the villain or make everything turn out that way. You know how your parents feel about lying. During this time, there was a knock on the door. I think it's for you, Tim said. Candy slowed down at the door and opened it, revealing a deputy commander, Candace Burns. He asked. She nodded. This is me, she said. Do you have identification? He asked. She pulled out her driver's license and showed it to him. After examining them, he returned them to her and then handed her an envelope. You've been reported, he said. There's an order for you to leave immediately. You can sign the divorce papers right away if you want. She nodded and pulled out the divorce papers. After reading through, she asked for a pen and signed the paper. I'll give this back to the lawyer, he said. You need to leave immediately. If you try to come back, you'll be arrested and sent to jail. Do you understand? Yes, she said, and tears streamed down her face. She looked back at Tim. I'm really sorry, she said. Yes, me too, Tim replied. Goodbye. Goodbye, she said, leaving gracefully. The lieutenant looked at Tim and nodded before leaving. The following days became chaotic for Tim. Candy never attempted to contact him, but Jake called Tim's home twice, leaving threatening messages. Damn it, Tim. I know you're there, he yelled. If you don't drop this lawsuit, I'll come and punch your face. Tim smiled, recorded the voicemails, and forwarded them to Ruby, who then reported to the local sheriff's office. Candy's father also called, asking if they could come to pick up more of her belongings. Of course, I agree. Tim said, just make sure she's not with you. She has a restraining order against me, George said. Fine, George, Candy's father, said with a sigh. When Candy's parents arrived, they took what Candy had left and used the time to try to persuade Tim to withdraw the divorce petition. Tim, she made a mistake, Bernice said. Of course, you can overlook what she did and take her back. She really wants you, you know. Bernice, what did she tell you? Tim asked. She said she argued with your boss, Bernice said, and that's it. Did she say anything else? Tim asked. Yes, but she didn't go into detail, and we didn't press her, Bernice replied. Tim took an envelope with photos and a DVD and showed them to Bernice and George. They were shocked when they saw the images. I apologize for not telling you the whole truth, Tim said. As you can see, things have become much worse than she expected. Oh God, Bernice said. I didn't know it was that bad. I'm sorry, Tim. I don't blame you for what you did. At that point, George, Candy's father, red-faced with anger, said, I'll have a long talk with our foolish daughter. Do you do anything else with these pictures? He asked Tim. Tim shook his head. Not yet, but I want her not to contest the divorce, he said. They shared sympathy with him for a moment, then finished packing the rest of Candy's things. Half an hour later, they left the house, hugged him tightly, and wished him all the best. At the end of that day, as Tim sat watching TV, there was another knock on the door. He looked through the peephole and saw Jake, Mike, and two of Tim's former colleagues. He went into the office, took a gun from the gun box, and dialed 911, holding the gun behind him just in time to open the door before they barged in. We'll beat you to a pulp, Jake shouted. Tim pulled out the gun and aimed it at Jake, forcing them to stop. Are you really going to shoot us, Tim? Jake said. You don't have the guts, do you? Do you really want to test this? You sure about that? Jake said. You don't have the guts, right? I called 911, and the police are on their way right now. If you're still here when they arrive, you'll be arrested for violating the restraining order. But Jake, I think he's right, one of the other two said. Jake stared at him for a moment, then turned back to Tim. At that moment, they heard a siren nearby and saw flashing red and blue lights. Yeah, Jake, I'm right, Tim said. They turned to leave, but two large police officers stood at the window. Tim lowered the gun, placing it right there. Put the gun down, sir, one of the officers said. Tim complied, putting the gun on the kitchen table. Do you have a permit for this firearm? Another officer asked. Yes, Tim said. This is my permit. Do you want to see it? He pulled out his wallet and showed the officers his driver's license and NRA gun training card. The officers nodded after examining the cards. All right, one of them said, just be careful when using it. You hear me? I hear you, Tim said. Thank you. The next 3 months passed like a blur for Tim. He enjoyed working at Empire more than ever without Jake. The weekly counseling sessions with Rose helped him deal with trust and anger issues. Meanwhile, he joined a fitness club, working out 3 days a week. He also started participating in martial arts classes, mainly for discipline rather than anything else. Additionally, he enrolled in a nutrition and fitness course recommended by Rose. The divorce process went smoothly, especially since Candy did not contest it. However, the lawsuit for emotional distress was a bit different. Ruby warned that they might eventually get fired. And indeed, 2 people were fired. However, the case against Jake surprised both Tim and Ruby. After hearing testimonies, reviewing evidence presented by Ruby, and examining Jake's financial records, the judge ruled in favor of Tim and ordered Jake to pay a $1 million compensation. At the end of the trial, the judge didn't mince words in praising Jake. Mr. Hudson, your conduct in this case is highly commendable, the judge said. You not only took advantage of someone who considered you a friend, but also abused your position as an employer to actively sabotage his marriage and family. I also note that you have repeatedly violated the restraining order imposed on you. Therefore, I, the judge, rule in favor of the plaintiff and order you to pay a compensation of $1 million. Your Honor, this is entirely legal. Jake's lawyer stood up. Mr. Winthrop, this court assesses Mr. Hudson's behavior not only as unlawful, but also as utterly despicable. The court's decision stands, the judge said. When is this compensation to be paid? Winthrop asked. Immediately, the judge said, unless, of course, the defendant opts for imprisonment for contempt of court. No, Your Honor, my client will pay as requested, Winthrop said, sitting back. Very well, the judge said, and God help you if that check fails to clear. The court is adjourned. He banged the gavel, marking the end of the trial. Jake wrote a check and handed it to his lawyer, who then passed it to the jailer. After the judge noted the check, the jailer handed it to Ruby, who then passed it to Tim. Though surprised, the check was accepted by the bank, and it covered Ruby's compensation. While working at Empire, Tim was contacted by some of Jake's clients. The rumors about the lawsuit had spread worldwide, and some companies were hesitant to continue business with someone they perceived as intentionally destroying others' marriages. In their view, someone who actively sabotages a friend's marriage is simply not trustworthy. Considering the current developments, Tim believed that Jake would go bankrupt within a year. During this time, Tim refused to date, despite some excellent women from the company expressing interest. In his perspective, he would remain the one who had been married until he received the final divorce. When that happened, he would be free to pursue relationships, but not before. As the final divorce approached, he celebrated with friends from the company. A few months after the divorce, Candy's mother called Tim. Tim, this is Bernice. Do you have a few minutes? She asked. Of course, Bernice, he replied. What's going on? This is about Candy, she said. She tested positive for HIV. She just got the test results. I'm sorry to hear that, Bernice, Tim said. But honestly, I'm not surprised. Besides, we are officially divorced now, so there's nothing I can do. She doesn't have my insurance, and I won't take responsibility for her, he said. I know, Bernice said. I just hope that maybe you'll understand more and talk to her a bit. Sure, I think I can do that, he said, but I don't know what it will accomplish. Please, come and talk to her for a few minutes, Bernice pleaded. Tim thought for a moment before responding. Okay, I'll be there in a few minutes. Thank you so much, Bernice said. Tim drove to Bernice and George's house, shocked to see Candy looking frail and weak. She walked over to greet him, but he shook his head in refusal, and she sat down, inviting him to sit on the sofa. You look healthy, Tim, she said. Better than my memories. How about you? Doing okay, Candy, he said. New job, new life, a fresh perspective. And you? Not good at all, she said. You know I've contracted HIV. It's what my mom warned me about. I'm sorry to hear this, but honestly, I'm not surprised, he said. Do you know when you got infected? I think it was one of those days at Jake's place, she said. That day, I had unsafe sex with some men. Does Jake know? He asked. She shook her head. Not yet, she said. But I'll have to tell him to get checked. I'm sure he won't take it lightly. Probably not, Tim said. She said, Look, Tim, I just want to apologize to you one last time and hope that maybe you'll understand in your heart and forgive me for what I've done to you. Now I realize that my actions have damaged many lives. I could have refused at any time, but I didn't. I was foolish and greedy. To be more accurate, let my hormones govern my rational thinking. And now I have to pay for that. I had the best husband and lover a girl could wish for, and I threw it all away just for something new. A few days ago, I knew you hated me, and you have the right to. But I don't want that to accompany me until I pass away without your forgiveness. Tim contemplated her words carefully. It was the first time he could remember that she genuinely took responsibility for what she had done, and the first time she admitted it. Her actions had caused harm to others. Of course, he could continue to harbor hatred towards her, but he remembered the sessions with Rose. Holding on to resentment against Candy wouldn't help him move forward. He nodded and said, "All right, Candy, I forgive you." She sat in a chair, crying. He thought about hugging her, but she declined with a wave of her hand. "Thank you so much, Tim," she said, tears streaming down her face. "This means more to me than you know. Listen, I want you to find a woman you can love and trust, marry, and have a family with. I'm done. I've ended it, but you still have a lifetime ahead, and you deserve to be happy." "Thank you," he said. "I will do that, and if you ever want to talk, let me know, okay?" She nodded, wiping away tears. "I will, Tim," she said. "Thank you for coming and talking to me. I've thought about you a lot in the past few months. I remember the woman you married." Tim spoke calmly. "By the way, where are Jake and Mike?" She shook her head. "Not good," she said. "Lately, he has become very cruel. He can't bear losing to you in court. He probably knows that his business has been struggling lately." "I've noticed," Tim said. "Has he resorted to physical harm?" "Not yet, but he's been very ruthless," she said. "Do you want me to be there when I tell them about the test results?" "No, but thanks for asking," he said. "This is my responsibility, and I'll have to face it, you know. I keep thinking that if I had just told him to leave from the first day of the camping trip, we would still be together." "Maybe there's a chance," Tim said, "but I feel like at some point it would have happened anyway. He's been pursuing you for a long time. What do you think?" "I think you're right," she said. "Look, Tim, I'm really tired and need to rest before facing everything again. Thank you for coming. This means more to me than you know." "No problem, Candy," he said. "And remember, call me if you just want to talk." "Okay," she nodded, wiping her tears. "I will. Goodbye, Tim," she added. "Think of me sometimes." "Will do." He sensed a certain finality in her last words and wondered if she intended to take her own life. "I will do that," he said. "Just don't do anything foolish, okay?" She laughed and said, "I won't." He stood up and walked towards the door. Bernice approached him before he left. "Thank you, Tim," she said, hugging him. "This means more than you think, and it's important to her as well." "No problem, Bernice," he said. "Keep an eye on her, okay?" "Of course I will," she said. A few weeks later, Tim was sitting on the couch, having dinner and watching the evening news when he heard a news report that caught his attention. The bodies of a local businessman, his son, and a woman believed to be the man's mistress were discovered today in what appears to be a double suicide. The anchor said, Jacob Hudson, president and founder of Hudson Consulting, along with his son and an unidentified woman, all died, with all three victims suffering gunshot wounds. Authorities say the police are investigating the incident, and detailed information will be provided as it becomes available. After recovering from the initial shock, Tim called Bernice. She cried as she answered the phone. "Bernice, what's going on?" he asked. "We just got the news. Candy is dead," she said. "It looks like that jerk Jake shot her, then shot their son, and finally himself." "Oh my God," Tim said. "I saw the news, and I hoped it wasn't her. I'm sorry." "It's her, isn't it?" Bernice said. "What do the police say?" "Not 100% certain yet," she said, "but I'm pretty sure she told Jake about her HIV, and he lost it. They're conducting autopsies now," she added. "I'm really sorry, Bernice," Tim said. "I want you to know I never wanted this to happen." "I understand, Tim," she said. "Candy put herself in this situation and has to pay the price. But it's still painful losing the only child like this. I only felt relieved when I knew you had settled everything with her. I like to think she's in a better place now," he said. "Just let me know if there's anything I can do to help," he added. "Thank you, Tim," she said. A memorial service for Candy was organized, and Tim took time off to be there with her parents. According to the autopsy results, both Jake and Mike, like Candy, tested positive for HIV. From what the police could gather, Candy had told Jake about her HIV, suggesting they get tested. When Jake and Mike learned they were also HIV positive, Mr. Hudson shot Candy in the head, then shot his son, and finally, himself. Tim spent a few days reflecting on Candy's death, remembering the happy years they had together. Then one day, out of the blue, he received a visit from Cynthia Stone, another colleague working in his team. "Hello, cowboy," she said. "Would you like to join us for a happy hour tonight? You look like you could use a bit of socializing." Tim thought about it for a moment, almost declining, but then he changed his mind. "All right," he said, "I could use some good company right now." "Sure, count me in." "How about meeting at Hitchhiker's after work?" she asked, smiling. "I'll be there," he said. "Thanks for the invite." So, the cycle of life goes on, he thought as she left.